We are on our E this week. This is the last week of our significant, honored, and elevated. And so we're going to be talking about elevated. But before we do, I want to kind of review where we are in this. And our series idea for the whole thing, what we've been talking about, is that Jesus is a man women can follow because he reveals the worth of women to the world. Jesus did something very unique in the way that he treated and interacted with women. He ushered in a new age of how we view gender and gender roles and equality and worth. We talked about ascribed value versus intrinsic value. And ascribed value is kind of how humanity has operated, right? Because what you could produce or reproduce, that gave you worth at some level. And Jesus came in and he said, no, you have intrinsic value because you're made in the image of God. So you automatically have value, you automatically have worth as a human being. And he kind of leveled the playing field. And we said that Jesus is a man women can follow because he reveals the worth of women to the world. And then we continue that idea with our significance idea. And we said that, I'm sorry, I think I went too far. Or I just left one out. Oh, no, that's right. That's significant. Jesus is a man women can follow because he cares for them through grace and recognition. We heard Jim Dre talk about a story where Jesus made a woman who had been basically an outcast and had been suffering for years feel incredibly significant through his grace and his recognition of her. And then last week we said that Jesus is a man women can follow because he brings belonging to the broken. And we said that we saw how a woman honored Jesus and Jesus honored her, and he actually honored her with this legacy throughout all of time, saying that people are going to talk about what she's doing here forever, wherever the gospel is preached. And what he did was when she broke through in vulnerability, and she showed up to Jesus with this vulnerable face, she found in him that thing she had been searching for all along. We said that that's the same way we find belonging in our brokenness in Jesus. And it was a beautiful, beautiful picture. And so this week we're going to talk about the elevated. And the reason, and I kind of want to clear up elevated, maybe what I mean by that. And because as we were preparing for this, like I said, we had a group of ladies that we took out to dinner, and we searched through all these things, and we asked questions, and I wanted to hear their perspective and their views on these stories. And one of the things was one of the ladies said, when you say elevated, don't say that women are better than men. Right? Because we're talking about this equality and value. And so if we say that women are somehow elevated above men, then you're doing a disservice the other way. And an injustice the other way. And I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And really when we talk about elevated, what we're going to see in our story today is something that I think we still do as human beings. Like just naturally, we tend to categorize rank and file things and people, right? Like we put people into categories. We have these norms, societal norms, that we drop people into these buckets, and our world works better. Maybe our mind works better. We feel more comfortable when the things fall into the buckets that they're supposed to fall into as far as we are concerned, right? And then there tends to be this rub whenever our rank and file, our categorization system doesn't match someone else's, right? Like this person with this kind of job, they're powerful, they have authority, they deserve my respect. This person who does not have that or has done this does not deserve my respect. And so we tend to drop them into buckets and categorize people. And we do it, based on the way people look, right? We do it based on the level of education at times. We do it on status in life currently. I think that we all just tend to, look, who's in, who's out, right? Like the church in general is kind of known for having that categorization, right? Who's in, who's out, who's good, who's bad. And we all tend to categorize. I think it's because we want the world to be equitable in the way that we want it to be, right? Like the way that we view it, the way that we see it, the way that we feel most comfortable with. It's like a couple weeks ago, last week, I was walking my children home on Tuesday around noon in the stroller, right? Walking downtown, and someone passed by, called me Mr. Mom, right? Because in the category that makes sense, in the middle of a day, the man might be working, and the mom would be the one that was walking the kids in the stroller home from preschool, right? Like that, and it kind of made me laugh. Also, I was like, I get to celebrate Mother's Day now, I guess. So breakfast in bed didn't happen. But is the idea is that made that person comfortable, right? To view it that way. Like, oh, this is out of the norm of my category and box, and mom would do that. And we're all this way. Like, if we look into ourselves, if we look at the way we view the world, we do this. And so when we talk about elevated, we're just going to see how Jesus kind of changes the game. He basically kind of says, I'm not even playing that game. Like that's the way you categorize, the way you rank, the way you file isn't the way that I do it. And so we're going to see this really cool story in Luke 10 where Jesus is going to just kind of change the game. He's going to kind of reorder someone's perspective and view. So here we go. It says, as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. So based on what we know about Martha throughout the Gospels, we kind of view her as maybe we know she had a brother and a sister, Lazarus and Mary. And we're going to see Mary here shortly. And it seems that Martha maybe was like the oldest child in the bunch. We got any oldest children in here, right? Like you're just a little different from the rest of the family, right? And it just is natural, kind of that oldest child. And so we see that, and we see that maybe she kind of has this matriarchy because we see that it was her home, and she invited Jesus into her home. It wasn't her brother's home as the man kind of in the family or anything like that. It was her home. And so we see that she's probably the oldest child in this group, and that this is her home that she operates. It says her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. This was pretty common inside. Outside, Jesus would have been sitting down, and people would have been standing. On the inside, Jesus would have been sitting, and other people would have been sitting lower, listening to what he taught. It says, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me, right? So she has this view of this, it's not equitable, right? The situation that's going on in the house right now is not equitable. So she goes to the teacher, the guy that everyone's listening to. She interrupts. She says, hey, listen, it's not equitable. I need you to make it equal, to make it fair, to make it right. And what she meant was, I want you to make it fair according to the way that I view things. Right? My sister's being, maybe she thought she was being lazy. Maybe she thought she shouldn't be here because this is a man's world. The women belong in the kitchen. Right? Maybe that was her view of the society and the culture that they lived in, this is how things are. This is what is equitable. This is the rank and file and category that I have people in. And I need you, Jesus, don't you see that this is unfair? Doesn't it seem this way to you too? So she goes to Jesus and she wants him to make things fair, to make things equitable, to prioritize things the way she, and maybe even the society as a whole, has prioritized things. So look what Jesus says. He says, but the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. He's like, listen, your rank and file system, your priorities, they've distracted you. You've become worried and upset over the thing that actually matters. Have you ever done that? Have you ever missed what matters because you're very distracted or you're very worried or you're very anxious over things? Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. I think a lot of us can relate to Martha here. A lot of us maybe even have that view of yeah, she's right. She's doing something good. She's working hard. She's preparing this meal for all these people. This matters. What she's doing matters. And Jesus says, no, there's only one thing that matters right now. And Mary's discovered it. You missed it. You missed what was important. You missed my categorization system. Jesus is saying you missed it. And so he's trying to help her understand. And what was it that Mary discovered? Well, she discovered that Jesus mattered, right? That this relationship with Jesus mattered. We know that this isn't long before Jesus would eventually be killed. Right? Time on earth with him is growing closer to an end. And what she discovered was this personal relationship this intimacy, this worship that mattered. He's saying, listen, you're distracted from that. There's something that matters. She discovered it. I'm not going to take it away from her. And again, this could have been a society and a cultural thing where Martha wants things to look a certain way because that's where she's comfortable. And Jesus said, no. It's different. And so what I want us to do today, what I want us to discuss today is this, that Jesus is a man women can follow because he lifts when others lower. She wanted this equity. She wanted, the better thing is for her to work, right, in there. And Jesus said, no. The better thing is this. Your scales are messed up. Your priorities are out of whack. I need you to get on the same page as where we are. And maybe you're in here today, and that's kind of like the way you view life and the way you've lived life and the way you categorize people and things. It could be one of two spectrums. You're in here and you follow Jesus, and you think that you've got a handle on Jesus' priorities and categories when it comes to the life you live. And so you drop people in the buckets that you think that Jesus has done. And I think time and time again, when I look in the Gospels, I think to myself, oh, wait, I got that wrong. Right? Jesus' perspective was a lot broader. It was more expansive. It was totally different than I thought. And we've seen that in his interactions with the women already as we talk about significant and honored. And we see it here as we talk about elevated. Or maybe you're on the other side and you look at that and Jesus and God and that whole thing and how God would categorize people and love you. Like you have an idea of what that looks like and it's very unappealing to you and that's not where you want to be. I understand that perspective as well. I get that. It's probably because you've been around people that call themselves Christians. And you're like, no, thank you. So today, I want us to kind of look at Jesus' priorities and categories, his rank and file system, what he did here with Mary, where it's like, no, there's something more special there. And I want to think, how do we get to that point where we can get to where Mary is, where we can discover something in Jesus, and we can begin to restructure, to see our lives change, to see our perspective change, and to view people, and to view moments like Jesus did, and like Mary did, who got it right, and not miss the mark with Martha. I think we actually learn a lot from her. So, we're going to look at, we miss what matters most when we are, and we're going to look at a couple things. First off, when we're prideful, right? She had an agenda for the day, and that agenda was what mattered most to her. And she stopped everything to get that agenda straight. How often do we do that in our own personal lives? We have our agenda, we have our thing that we want to do. When it comes to life, this is where I struggle the most. In my home, in my interactions with people, in myself, this is where I know I struggle. Where it's like, no, I want a measure of control, I have an agenda, I have a plan, and I'm holding that very tightly. But I think when we do that, we miss what matters most. We miss people when we have a plan that just kind of runs over people, right? Oh, we're going to go this way. I actually had a counselor that I see every now and then, and that's what he told me when we had our second session after he gave me this big test thing to test my mind. And he's like, yeah, you're kind of the, you're going to go that way. And people can either join you or they cannot, and you're just going to go that way regardless. He said, you're 220 and everybody else is 110, and when they plug into you, they blow up. He said, and the reason is that's a pride issue. I go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Looking at the interactions with people, looking at how I miss the things that matter so many times is because of my own pride, my own agenda. And what we see here is Mary had submitted her agenda and her pride. She had humbled herself, which is kind of how we get out of that. She humbled herself to see what mattered most in that moment. And that was the thing that Martha really needed to do, was to humble herself and say, what really matters? Jesus had a brother, James. He wasn't a follower of Jesus until after Jesus resurrected from the dead. And he was like, oh, okay, then I think he actually might be who he said he was. And he wrote a letter to some Christians, and he said this, because I think this is a problem that we all face throughout all the time. He said, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. That's what we see that Mary did. She humbled herself. She set aside her prideful agenda that she could have had, And it's like, Martha, you've missed it. You've not discovered what Mary has discovered. That's if you humble yourself to Jesus, you actually get to live in the moments that really matter. It's a beautiful lesson to learn for all of us. And maybe that's not you. Maybe you're like, no, the pride thing's not me. Maybe it's the next thing we saw is that she was distracted. You ever get distracted in life? You ever just miss things? You ever get done with something and you're like, I think I just missed everything that was for? Have you ever just been on your phone the whole time? I love sitting in restaurants and watching people. The other day, Martha and I we were in San Diego, and we were just spending a little alone time. And we were in this super cool cafe right downtown in San Diego, and they were like super fancy brunch stuff. So it was really cool. And we're sitting there, and there's people sitting next to us. I don't know if they were a couple or not. I couldn't tell. But it was just very interesting that they both were on their phones at the same time, for long periods of time. And I couldn't help but think to myself, if I did that right now, I might miss something with my wife. And then I slapped the phone out of her hand and said, if you do this, you might miss something with me. Just kidding. Just kidding. But have you ever done that? Have you ever been so distracted that you just missed it? You missed that person. You missed that moment. You missed what actually mattered because you were distracted by things that don't really matter. Sometimes it takes a death of a loved one to really trigger that in people, or it takes some kind of tragedy or some other thing to really trigger oh yeah, that time mattered more than what I thought it did and I missed it. And I think that's here what Jesus is trying to say to Martha is listen, what Mary discovered is that this moment matters. What you're doing, you're not doing a bad thing, Martha, but you've gotten so distracted, you've missed what matters. In your categorization, in your priority, in your rank and file, in your cultural mindset, you've missed this, and you want to take it away from Mary, and I'm not going to do that. You've missed it. So when we're distracted, we've got to get focused. This is such an intentional thing. Focus is really, really hard. And I'm not suggesting that, you go out and just start taking Ritalin to help you focus or anything like that, like we oftentimes do with kids or teenagers. No. Schedule, plan, have intentionality in everything that you do and have a focus in everything you do. The reason I didn't have my phone and it was not in my hand like it normally would be at the table when I was with my wife was because I made a plan to keep it in my pocket and to leave it alone, right? There was a focus that needed to happen in that moment. And I realized that because I've started realizing, especially as I'm looking through this stuff, going, I miss moments. The things that I think are important aren't. That person is important. Those people are important. This moment right here, right now, you guys are all in this room together for a reason. This matters. And so we have to focus, and we have to be intentional about that. But also we see from her, she was working for something. She was working for Jesus. And again, a lot of this is personality. And I don't want to say that Martha was just wrong. I just think she missed it. And again, we can all relate to just missing it. But this one's a big one. Is we see that Martha was kind of working for her relationship with Jesus. Right? There was this idea of I invited him into my home, I've got to do this big thing, and I've got to work. Not the Rihanna song. Come on, you guys were thinking it. It's okay. You're like, do I laugh in church about the Rihanna song? And it was this work mindset. And I think this is something very important for all of us to understand because when it comes to faith, when it comes to religion, there is this mentality that there's these things I have to do for God to accept me and God to love me. There's these things that I have to do to be okay with Jesus. In reality, what Jesus is saying, no, she's sitting here just with me. We're just in relationship, Martha. Mary's just, what she's discovered is that there's me and there's this moment and that I'm a person and that there's a connection in the relationship. And so it's not working for our relationship with Jesus or working for this goodness or working for grace, because at that point it's not grace anymore. It's working from it, working out of it. It's this idea that what's happened, Jesus has already taken care of it. He's already done the work. I can just be me. And then at that point, working becomes out of this gratitude, not out of guilt or obligation. The work that you do in your faith to grow spiritually becomes a discipline, right? And not this legal system that you're trying to follow to do to be okay with God. I think we see this all the time in religions, and I think it's a huge problem that people have with organized religion, right? Is because I can't measure up to all the do's and don'ts in this list. And Jesus is saying it's not about working, it's not about doing. I've already done the work. It's about me as a person in a relationship, in intimacy. It's receiving what I've already done. It's realizing that you already have all the things that you've ever wanted. He said, hey, listen, Martha, you can stop working. I appreciate what you're doing, but why don't you just come in here and be with us? Be in this moment. And it was really awesome to see kind of Jesus, again, not in this harsh correction, but just in this, hey, Mary discovered this moment. Martha, I want you to as well. Let's put the rank and file that we have in our minds away. And let's just say that something else matters in this moment. Jesus lifts up what others want to lower. In that moment, in the role of Mary, Martha was like, nope, it's not fair. Jesus said, no, actually what she's done, she's discovered something important. And you can too. You know, when it comes to our rank and file system, we look at being focused and being humble, working out of a relationship with Jesus. It kind of made me think of a story. A few years ago, I had met a young lady that I didn't really even remember her, didn't know her family, but had met her at this serving event that I was doing at this church. And she remembered who I was, and she had a rough time, and she ended up in a treatment center here in Las Vegas. And she asked if the tall, curly-headed pastor from the church would come visit her in the treatment center. And I didn't know who she was. I didn't know anyone in her family. Some of her family did come to the church. I just didn't know who they were. And I was like, yeah, I'll go. And I went. And I showed up at the wrong time. It wasn't visiting hours. But I was able to kind of figure out what I needed to do next to begin a relationship with this young girl. Martha and I we visited her all the time. We were regulars around there. All the counselors knew who we were. Other kids at the place actually started putting our names on their list so we could come sit with them as well. And it was really this wonderful time with connecting with these kids that were really, really struggling with some things. But when I got there the first day, family counseling had just ended, and so this young lady's mom was walking out, and I could tell that she was probably in the adult entertainment industry in some way. And then as we got to know her better, we found that she was a dancer. And so we knew building this relationship with the young girl was important, right? But we also knew that when she left the treatment center, she would go back into her home, and it was some of her home life situation that was really part of the reason why she ended up there. And so I told Martha, I said, we have to go and build a relationship with her mom and her younger brother as well. So we need to take them out to eat. Let's get to know them. Let's connect with them as well. And like Chris Rock said, you don't know who really hates women? The other women, right? Like sometimes there's this we're quick to judge, right? Like we're quick to put people in a box, and sometimes that happens, right? I don't want to offend anyone in here. Just maybe some head nods are like, yeah, that happens. And so Martha really struggled with the idea of making friends with this dancer. And to have her husband also be friends with this dancer. And my encouragement to her was we got to push through the outer facade, right, to a heart that needs Jesus. Someone who needs love and care. They need to be known and cared for. We have to push through that to see that. She's like, okay, but it's going to be really tough for me. I was like, okay, I get it. Let's be honest about that. Let's be open about that. And Martha, even to this day, can still text her and talk to her and has a relationship and has a friendship. But she pushed through these judgments. She humbled herself. She took away her priorities, and she looked at, okay, what is it that Jesus would have me do in this situation? How would he have me view this person? And she was able to push through and connect and build a meaningful relationship with her. But it took humbling herself, taking her categories and pushing them aside and say, okay, Jesus, how do you view this? How do you categorize this? What's the rank and file that you have for me? And that's what I hope today, that we'll be able to push aside our own systems and ways of thinking and begin to submit to how Jesus views people. and how he would view the situation, how he would take this moment and say, I want to discover the best thing that's going on, and I want to view it that way.